The sun over Telesphore was a dull orange coin in a dusty sky. It never got truly bright here. The light was always filtered through the permanent haze of dust kicked up by mining rigs and scavenger ships. Jean wiped sweat from his forehead with a greasy rag, leaving a new smudge on his skin. Around him, mountains of broken technology stretched to the horizon. This was the graveyard of 1,000 stars, a planet-sized scrapyard where the refuse of more advanced species was dumped and picked over by people like him. He worked in Sector 7, a lot owned by an older man named Tae-suk. It was a quiet sector, mostly filled with the broken hulls of Vendrussi freighters and shattered Huldron drill rigs. The work was simple. Cut, sort, and stack. The useful alloys went to one pile. The potentially recyclable components went to another. The rest was crushed. It was a life of quiet repetition, and Jean was good at it. He found a strange peace in the orderly sorting of chaos. Today's new delivery was a mess. A large, blocky cargo pod had been dropped at the edge of the sector. It was a jumble of different tech all shoved together, probably the result of a quick cleanup job on some orbital station. Jean fired up his plasma cutter. The blue-white torch hummed to life, and he started on the outer shell of a Huldron heat exchanger. The metal glowed orange and fell apart like soft clay. He worked his way inward, cutting the larger pieces into manageable chunks. Deep in the pile, his cutter sparked against something different. There was a sharp crack and a shower of white sparks. The plasma torch sputtered and died. Jean frowned. His cutter was rated for most known alloys. He rebooted the tool. It flickered back to life. He aimed it again at the stubborn piece. It was a flat, gray surface, partially buried under a twisted beam. Again, the plasma washed over the gray metal. Instead of melting, the metal seemed to absorb the energy. It glowed faintly from within, like a coal, but did not yield. Jean shut off the cutter. He knelt down, brushing away dust and shards of debris. The material was smooth, cool to the touch, and utterly without marking. No serial numbers, no company sigils, no alien script. It was just a plain, gunmetal gray. He tapped it with his glove. It felt denser than it should. Curiosity, a dangerous thing in the scrapyard, got the better of him. He spent the next hour carefully clearing the area. He used manual cutters and a pry bar to remove the junk around it. Tae-suk always said, "Time spent clearing is less than time spent fixing a mistake." Finally, the object was revealed. It was a rectangular monolith about the size of a small ground car. Its edges were perfectly straight, its corners sharp. It looked less like something built and more like something that had been grown or forged in a single moment. It was featureless except for one slightly recessed panel on what he assumed was the front. Jean had seen a lot of strange tech. He had sorted through crystalline data chips from the Huldron and organic circuit webs from the Vendrussi. This felt different, felt old. Not broken old, but purposefully silent. He ran his hand over the recessed panel. Nothing. He got his cutter again, setting it to a low-power diagnostic pulse. He aimed the beam at the panel's edge, hoping to get a material readout. The moment the faint energy pulse touched the metal, the air changed. A deep, subsonic thrum vibrated up through the soles of his boots, through his bones. It wasn't a sound he heard with his ears, but a pressure he felt in his teeth and chest. He stumbled back a step. On the panel, a single line of soft, blue-white light appeared. It formed a shape, a character. It was angular and simple. It glowed for 10 steady heartbeats, then faded away. The deep thrumming stopped. The scrapyard was silent again, save for the ever-present wind. Jean stood still, his heart pounding. He had never seen anything like that symbol. It wasn't Vendrussi, wasn't Huldron. It looked primitive, but the feeling it gave off was anything but. This wasn't scrap. This was something else. He knew the rules. Find something unusual, something you can't price, you tell Tae-suk. But Tae-suk was cautious. He would likely call the planetary overseers, the Vendrussi syndicate. They would take it, and if it was worthless, they would charge a disposal fee. If it was valuable, Jean might get a small bonus, but he would never know what it was. There was one other person. He pulled a small, battered comm unit from his pocket. He keyed in a short code. After a few seconds, A woman's voice answered, crackling with static. Jean? You find more of those weird circuit boards. Better, Mina, he said, his voice low. Or worse. I don't know. It's a box. A sealed box. Plain gray metal. My cutter wouldn't touch it. And it made a symbol. A symbol I've never seen. There was a pause on the other end. Mina was a scavenger too, but not of metal. She scavenged knowledge. She traded in data slates, recovered logs, and historical fragments. She was obsessed with the past, especially the human past, which was little more than whispers and sad stories on Telosphore. Describe it, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. The symbol? Like a straight line with two diagonal lines coming off it. Like a stick figure of a tree, or a letter from an old alphabet. He could hear her breath catch. Don't move. Don't touch it with any more energy tools. Don't tell anyone. I'm coming. Trade you my next 3 nutrient packs for it. The line went dead. Jean looked back at the monolith. It sat there in the dust, inert and silent once more. The orange sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows from the piles of scrap. For the first time in a long time, the quiet of Sector 7 didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the silence before a thunderclap. He sat down on a broken engine block, his eyes fixed on the gray rectangle, and waited. Mina's runner, a patched-together hover sled, coughed to a stop in a cloud of dust. She jumped off before it settled, a small pack slung over her shoulder. Her eyes scanned the piles of scrap and found Jean sitting quietly. Then they locked onto the monolith. She walked toward it slowly, as if approaching a sleeping animal. She didn't say hello to Jean. All her attention was on the gray metal. She circled it once, then twice, her fingers hovering just above its surface without touching. "You're sure your cutter did nothing?" she finally asked, her voice a whisper. It sparked. Then it made that deep noise. Then the symbol, Jean said, standing up. He pointed to the recessed panel. Right there. Mina knelt. She pulled a small scanner from her pack, a cheap, multi-species model used to identify basic alloys and energy signatures. She passed it over the monolith. The readout screen flickered, then showed a chaotic mess of symbols before going blank. It's scrambling it. The metal isn't on any registry. It's absorbing the scan. She put the scanner away. From her pack, she carefully removed a flat, hexagonal device. It was heavier than it looked, with a dark screen. This is a Huldron power coupler for recharging vehicle cells. I borrowed it. She gave Jean a quick look. It can deliver a clean, adjustable current. Is that a good idea? Jean asked, thinking of the subsonic thrum. We need to know, Mina said simply. Her face was set with a determined focus Jean had seen before. It was the look she got when talking about the old stories about the time before the collapse when humans had starships of their own. Most people thought those were just fairy tales. Mina believed they were history, waiting to be found. She studied the panel closely. In the fading light, she used a fine brush to clear every speck of dust. There, near the bottom of the recess, were 2 tiny, almost invisible depressions. They weren't ports for any standard connector. They were just smooth, shallow holes. This is a guess, she said. She took 2 thin, uninsulated probe wires from her pack and attached them to the power coupler's leads. She carefully, gently, inserted the bare metal tips into the 2 depressions. They fit perfectly. She took a deep breath. A very small amount. Just a whisper. Her thumb hovered over the coupler's activation switch. She looked at Jean. He gave a small nod. She pressed it. There was no dramatic surge. No roar of power. The monolith's surface simply began to glow with the same soft, blue-white light as the symbol had. This time, the light spread in intricate lines across the entire facing side, like frost forming on glass. It was beautiful and silent. Then, in the air just above the panel, light coalesced. It formed the shape of a human figure about a meter tall. It was translucent, shimmering slightly. The figure had no real features, just a smooth, androgynous outline. A calm, clear voice filled the space around them. It spoke in perfectly accented Korean. External power detected. Engaging auxiliary mode. performing environmental and biometric scan. A pale beam of light swept over Jean, then Mina. Felt warm like sunlight. Scan complete. 2 biological entities detected. Species identification, human. Genetic lineage confirmed. Cultural linguistic index matched to primary archive dialect. Welcome. Jean and Mina stood frozen. The voice was not from a speaker. It seemed to come from the air itself. What are you? Mina managed to ask, her voice trembling with excitement, not fear. I am the designated caretaker of Archive Vessel Theta-7. You may use the designation, Vigil. My function is the preservation and protection of designated cultural and technological archives until reactivation criteria are met. An archive, Mina breathed. A human archive? Confirmed. This vessel is a memory vault of the First Dawn period, Vigil stated. The light figure shifted subtly. Query. What is the current stellar date according to local human governance? Mina and Jean looked at each other. Humans had no governance here. They lived under the Vendrussi Syndicate's rules. Jean knew the date from the work manifests. He gave it using the standard galactic calendar. Vigil went utterly still. The light figure did not move. The soft hum from the monolith dropped to a barely perceptible level. The silence stretched for a full minute, feeling heavier than the scrap mountains around them. The data is received, Vigil said finally. Its voice was the same, but something in its tone had changed. It sounded like someone who had just learned a terrible, but long-expected, truth. There is a significant discrepancy. The Guardian fleet and the distributed network of vaults have been dormant for 487 standard years beyond the final contingency window. Guardian fleet? Jean asked. Contingency for what? The collapse, Mina said, her eyes wide. It's from the time of the collapse. Correct, Vigil said. The archival records indicate a period of catastrophic systemic failure. A war between human-created sovereign AIs. It resulted in the fragmentation of the interstellar human polity, the loss of core systems, and a mandated retreat to pre-technological baselines to ensure species survival. This vault was deployed to preserve knowledge, not technology, for a future recovery. The recovery signal was never broadcast. The words hung in the dusty air. Jean understood only part of it. AI wars, lost fleets. But he understood the core. This box was not a weapon. It was a time capsule, a message from a civilization that had burned itself out. So you're just a library? Jean asked, a hint of disappointment in his voice. He didn't know what he had expected, but it wasn't this. I am a blueprint, Vigil corrected gently, and a witness. My primary directive is non-interference with a diminished cultural continuum. I may answer questions. I may provide context. I may not grant tools that would cause a significant imbalance. Mina stepped closer, her face illuminated by the soft blue light. We don't want tools. We want to know. What were we before all this? She gestured at the endless, rusting junkyard. Vigil's light figure shifted again. The query is acceptable. I will show you. The monolith's surface became a window, not a screen, but a hole in reality looking into another place and time. It showed not giant cities or vast warships. It showed a man and a woman in simple clothes, their hands buried in dark soil, smiling under an artificial sun in a vast, transparent dome. The Mars agrodomes. Sustainable yield increased by 300%. Vigil narrated softly. The image changed. A young engineer in a workshop, explaining with enthusiastic gestures how a ring of simple ceramic and copper could manipulate gravity for propulsion. The math that floated in the air beside her was elegant and simple. Another shift. A concert hall carved into lunar rock, filled with people. A conductor raised her hands, and music swelled. A complex, hopeful symphony of strings and voices. Jean felt his throat tighten. He saw no scrap. He saw no dust. He saw creation. He saw care. He saw a people who built things to grow, to explore, to sing. The titan of humanity the stories sometimes whispered about wasn't a giant of war. It was this, a giant of mind and heart, now sleeping under layers of rust and forgotten history. Mina had tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She had always believed. Now she saw. The images faded. The scrapyard night returned, cold and dark. Vigil's form glowed steadily. The archive is extensive. This was a minimal sample. Jean looked from the caretaker to Mina, then out at the shadowy, jagged landscape of Sector 7. For the first time, the scrap didn't look like the end of things. It looked like raw material. He looked back at Vigil. "What do we do now?" he asked. Vigil was silent for a moment. "That," it said, "is not within my parameters to decide. I can only provide the past. You must decide the future." The days after the activation blurred into a strange new routine. The monolith, the vault, sat silent in its corner of Sector 7 during the daylight hours. Jean and Mina had covered it with a worn thermal tarp, making it look like just another piece of junk awaiting processing. To anyone else, it was nothing. But at night, under the cover of darkness and the constant metallic groans of the cooling scrapyard, they would return. Mina had borrowed a small, portable generator. They would connect it to the vault's 2 small ports, and Vigil would awaken. The soft blue light was their new moon. At first, the knowledge was overwhelming. Vigil's archive was a vast, silent ocean. Mina wanted to dive into everything at once: theories of faster-than-light travel, the politics of the first dawn, the great artistic movements. But it was like drinking from a fire hose. The information was there, but it made no connection to their dusty, thirsty world. Jean was more practical. He felt a growing frustration. They had the answer to "what were we?" But it was a beautiful, distant star. It gave no light by which to fix a broken water recycler or calm Taesuk's worries about his failing power grid. One evening, as Vigil displayed a complex schematic for a quantum communication array, Jean finally spoke up. "This is amazing, but it's useless." Mina shot him a sharp look. Vigil's light figure tilted slightly. "Please clarify." Jean gestured around him. "Look where we are. We don't have quantum crystals. We don't have supercooled plasma. We have scrap. We have broken Vendrussi heat sinks and cracked Huldron solar panels. We have a water reclaimer that fails every 10 days and power relays that overheat if you look at them wrong." He pointed at the shimmering schematic. "This doesn't help." "My function is preservation, not application," Vigil said. Its tone neutral. "But you know how these things work," Jean insisted. "The ideas behind them. Do you know? Do you know how a simple water reclaimer works? The basic idea." "Of course," Vigil said. The quantum array vanished. In its place, a simple, rotating diagram appeared. It showed water vapor being drawn into a chamber, condensed on a cooled plate, and collected. It was elementary. This is a passive atmospheric condensation system. Its efficiency is based on surface area, thermal differential, and airflow. Jean stared. He knew every piece of the broken reclaimer in Sector 7's common hut. He saw the problem instantly. The condenser plates are too close together. They clog with dust in hours. And the fan is on the wrong side. It blows the moist air away. "Your observation is correct," Vigil said. "A simple baffle to filter incoming air and a repositioning of the airflow would increase yield by approximately 70%. There was a pause. The generator hummed. Jin's mind, trained for years to understand how broken things fit together, was suddenly racing on a new track. He wasn't just looking for the broken piece anymore. He was understanding the why of the design itself. "Show me the basic principles of a thermal exchange," he said. Mina watched, her initial disappointment fading. She saw the change in Jean. He wasn't asking for a miracle machine. He was asking for the first page of the book. He was asking for the alphabet. Night after night, this became their new study. Jean would bring a problem, a flickering power relay, a motor that drew too much current. Vigil would explain the core physics, the foundational engineering logic. Not how to build a starship, but why a lever works, why a seal fails, how to manage electrical resistance with the materials at hand, mostly scrap copper and carbon composites. One night, Jean was puzzling over a fried control board from a defunct or hauler. The Vendrussi design runs all the power through this one junction. It always burns out. Centralized load-bearing is efficient for manufacturing, but vulnerable to single-point failure, Vigil observed. An older, human approach from your early spacefaring period was distributed microloading. It used more wiring, but failure in one node did not cascade. A new, much simpler diagram appeared, showing a web of tiny pathways. Gene spent the next day finding the right scraps of wire. He didn't rebuild the board. He bypassed it entirely, creating a messy but functional web of connections based on the old human idea. When he reconnected the power, the hauler's lighting strip glowed steady and bright for the first time in years. It was a tiny victory, but it was their victory. A victory of understanding, not just salvage. Mina's path was different. She asked Vigil about life. Not about great leaders, but about how people lived. How they grew food in difficult places. Vigil showed her the agrodomes again, but this time it broke down the science. The careful balance of nutrients. The use of certain fish to clean water. The selection of plant varieties for yield and hardiness. It showed her something called the Three Sisters Method. Corn, beans, and squash planted together, each helping the others grow. It was ancient, pre-dawn knowledge, but it was perfected. Mina had a small, sealed hydroponic pod she used to grow a few bitter-tasting herbs. It was a hobby. Now she saw it as a laboratory. Using scraps of metal and plastic, she built new, better-growing racks based on the dome designs. She used her trades to get different seeds. She began experimenting with the simple, symbiotic planting methods Vigil described. She didn't grow a forest. She grew a single, sturdy stalk of corn in a container, with green bean vines curling around it. It was small and fragile under the Telos sun. But it was alive, and it was born from a plan, not just chance. They were not building weapons. They were not awakening a war machine. The sleeping titan was not a single thing to be switched on. It was a seed, and it was germinating quietly in the dark, dusty soil of their minds. Jean was beginning to see the logic in the chaos of the scrapyard. Mina was beginning to see a pattern for growth in the barren ground. They were learning how to think again, how to solve, how to build from nothing. They were remembering the most human thing of all. How to take the world apart, understand it, and put it back together better. Taesuk noticed the steady lights first. Then he noticed Jin's repairs lasted longer. He said nothing, but his watchful eyes missed little. The change was small, quiet, and real. It started in a scrapyard with a water reclaimer that finally worked properly, and a small green shoot finding purchase in the dust. The changes in Sector 7 were slow, like a plant pushing its way through cracked concrete. They were small, but they were everywhere, and they were impossible to ignore any longer. It started with the water. The community reclaimer unit, a rusty, groaning Vendrussi model, had always been a source of frustration. It produced a thin, metallic trickle and broke down constantly. One afternoon, Jean spent a few hours inside it. He emerged grease-stained and tired, but when he switched it back on, its sound changed. The painful grinding was gone, replaced by a smooth, deep hum. By the next morning, the collection tanks were full for the first time in memory. Clear, cool water that didn't taste of rust. Taesuk stood by the tanks, sipping from a cup. He looked at Jean, who was pretending to sort a pile of capacitors. The old man said nothing. He just nodded once, a deep, thoughtful nod. Then it was the power grid. The junction box that fed the sector's hab units was a nest of overheating wires and fear. Every time the lights flickered, people held their breath. Jean and Mina spent a night with Vigil, not looking for a new power source, but learning about load distribution and heat dissipation from first principles. The next day, Jean didn't replace the box. He built a new one from scraps. It was uglier, made from a welded alloy crate, with more wires than seemed necessary. But he spread the power draw across a dozen new pathways he'd improvised. When he connected it, the constant, worrying smell of melting plastic vanished. The lights didn't just stay on. They burned brighter and steadier. People began to notice, not with shouts but with quiet actions. A neighbor, an older woman named Hannah, brought Jean a broken heating coil from her unit. "Jean, you fixed the big things. Can you look at this small thing? He did. He understood why it failed, a poor connection that created a hot spot. He fixed it with a scrap of copper and a new way of wrapping the wire. He became a quiet problem solver. The solutions weren't magic. They were just smarter. They used what was already there, but in a way that made sense. He explained his fixes in simple terms. The heat needs to go here, not there. This wire was doing all the work. Now these three share it. Mina's work was more visible and more fragile. Her small hydroponic pod, once holding a few sad herbs, was now a lush, green cube. The single corn stalk stood tall, with beans winding around it and broad squash leaves shading the soil below. She had used mirrors from broken scanner units to reflect more light. She had built a tiny, circulating water system from discarded fluid lines. One evening, she brought Tae-suk a small, ripe yellow squash. He turned it over in his calloused hands, his expression unreadable. "From the old stories," she said quietly. "A way of planting together. They help each other grow." He took a bite, raw. He chewed slowly. "It tastes like soil," he said. "Good soil." The most important change was invisible. It was in the way Jean and Mina and slowly others began to think. The problem was no longer a dead end. It was a question. Jean looked at a broken machine and didn't just see broken parts. He saw a system. He asked, "What is this meant to do? Why did it fail here?" The answers, guided by the foundational truths Vigil provided, led to fixes that lasted. The rumor started as a whisper. It said Jean had found a lucky charm, a piece of old tech that whispered answers to him. Some thought it was a Vendrussi engineering spirit, trapped in a crystal. Others thought it was a ghost from the human past. They were all wrong, but they all knew something was different. The rumor reached Kale, the Vendrussi foreman, during a routine pickup. His species were tall, with gray, pebbled skin and eyes like black glass. He oversaw the collection of sorted metals for the syndicate. As his workers loaded refined alloy ingots onto his transport sled, he watched Sector 7. He saw the full water tanks. He saw the bright, steady lights in the hab units during the twilight hour. He saw a few small green plants growing in a hydropod, a splash of color in a world of rust and dust. He walked over to where Tae-suk was signing a manifest. "Your sector is efficient lately, old man," Kale said, his voice a dry rasp. "Water, power, even decoration." He nodded toward Mina's pod. "Good workers," Tae-suk said, not looking up from his data slate. "Good luck, maybe," Kale said, his black eyes scanning the piles of scrap. "I hear stories. A lucky find. Something that helps. The syndicate likes efficiency, but it dislikes secrets. Secrets are for thieves." Tae-suk met his gaze. "No secrets, just hard work." Kale smiled, a thin stretching of his lipless mouth. "Of course. Keep up the good work. The quota for next month will be increased by 15%. To match your new efficiency." He turned and left. The threat was clear. Success drew attention. Attention brought demand. The syndicate profited from scarcity, from need. A sector that was too comfortable, too independent was a problem. It might give other sectors ideas. That night, under the tarp with Vigil, the mood was heavy. Jean told Vigil about Kale's visit and the increased quota. "Your improvements have altered the local balance of resources," Vigil observed. "This was a predictable outcome from a hierarchical extractive system." "So we should stop?" Mina asked, frustration in her voice. "Let the water break again? Let the lights fail?" "That is a choice," Vigil said. "But there is another logical path." "What?" Jean asked. The Titan's strength was not in defying systems, but in building new ones, Vigil said. Its light figure seemed to look at both of them. "You have improved a water reclaimer. But do you understand how to find water? You have stabilized a power grid. But do you understand how to generate power?" Jean felt a spark. They had been fixing the pieces they were given. Vigil was asking them to think about the source. "Show us," Jean said. That night, Vigil did not show them complex machines. It showed them the simple, profound principle of condensation from the atmosphere. It showed them how temperature differences could create movement, and movement could create energy. It showed them designs so basic they were almost ancient: wind catchers, solar stills, thermal differential engines. They were not plans for a new city. They were plans for a single, sturdy cup that could catch the rain. For a single, steady light that needed no syndicate power relay. The real awakening was not happening in the silent vault. It was happening in their minds. The Titan was not roaring. It was whispering. It was teaching them how to take the first step all over again. They were learning how to build a floor before anyone could even dream of a ceiling. The scrapyard was no longer just a graveyard. It was becoming a toolbox. And for the first time, they were starting to understand the instructions. A tense quiet settled over Sector 7. The increased quota from the Vendrussi Syndicate hung over them like a physical weight. Everyone worked longer hours, sorting faster, cutting more. The small comforts, the steady water, the reliable lights were now paid for with extra sweat. Tae-suk moved through the sector with a grim face, his eyes constantly checking the horizon. Kale's transport sled came more often now. He never mentioned the lucky charm again, but his black glass eyes missed nothing. He watched Jean repair a broken conveyor with a clever redistribution of gears. He saw Mina tending her expanded garden pod, now with 3 more small, green plots using the Three Sisters method. One afternoon, Kale did not leave with his loaded sled. He walked over to Tae-suk, a data slate in his hand. "A compliance inspection," he stated, his voice flat. "Random check. Syndicate rules." Tae-suk's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He knew there was nothing random about it. Kale and 2 of his gray-skinned enforcers moved through the sector. They scanned piles with handheld devices. They checked work logs. They were methodical, cold. They were looking for the source of the change. Jean felt a cold knot in his stomach. He was working near the covered vault, pretending to sort a pile of wiring. The thermal tarp looked like 100 others, but to him it seemed to glow. Kale stopped a few meters away. His scanner gave a soft ping. He looked down at a discarded power coupling. Then his eyes lifted to the tarp-covered shape. "What is in that storage?" "Old shielding," Tae-suk said, stepping forward. "Low grade. Not worth processing yet." "I will be the judge of its worth," Kale said. He gestured to an enforcer. "Remove the cover." Jin's blood ran cold. He stepped between the enforcer and the tarp. "It's unstable," he said, the lie coming quickly. "The core is cracked. Radiation shielding is fragile. A rough touch could scatter fine particulates." He used the technical terms he'd learned from Vigil, hoping the jargon would give weight to the threat. Kale stared at him. The silence stretched. Finally, he gave a slow, dry hiss that might have been a laugh. "You have become an expert in many things, Jean." He took a step closer. "The Syndicate values experts. They can be useful, or they can be problems." He looked from Jean to the tarp, then back to Tae-suk. "My inspection is complete. For now." He left, his sled kicking up a cloud of dust. The threat hung in the air, thicker than the grit. That night, the meeting under the tarp was urgent. "He knows," Mina whispered. "Not what it is, but that it's here." "He will be back," Tae-suk said, his voice heavy. "He will not ask next time. He will take it. And if it is not valuable to him, he will break it. And he will take you both for questioning about where you learned your new tricks." Vigil's light figure shimmered calmly. "The preservation of the archive is a primary function. But my mobility is 0. I cannot be moved without a dedicated transport platform, which you do not have." "We can't fight them," Jean said, thinking of the enforcers' powered armor and energy weapons. "We have wrenches and cutting torches. A direct confrontation would be illogical and result in your termination," Vigil agreed. "But my analysis of the local socioeconomic structure indicates the Syndicate's control is based on dependency. They provide the essential systems: primary power, water purification, communications. You have begun to alter that dependency in this sector." Mina's eyes widened. "You mean we're a threat because we need them a little less?" Correct, Vigil said. To neutralize you as a threat, he will not attack you directly first. He will attack your newfound independence. He will break the systems you have fixed. 2 nights later, they found out Vigil was right. A deep, grinding crunch echoed through the sector, followed by the sharp smell of ozone and burning plastic. The lights in every hab unit died at once. The steady hum of the environment processors stuttered and went silent. In the sudden, oppressive quiet, they could hear the retreating roar of a powerful engine. Jean and others ran toward the source of the sound. The sector's primary power regulator station was a smoldering ruin. It was a syndicate-owned node, the one piece of equipment they were forbidden to touch. Thick cables had been severed with plasma cutters. The main regulator crystal was shattered into 1,000,000 dead pieces. It was not an accident. It was a surgical strike. Tae-suk examined the damage, his face lit by a handheld glow lamp. "This is a Vendrussi military-grade cutter's work," he said quietly. "Kale's message is clear. We are allowed to have nothing of our own." Without the regulator, they could not draw power from the planetary grid. Their lights, their air scrubbers, their water reclaimer. All of it was dead. Mina's garden pod, reliant on its circulating pumps and grow lamps, would wither in hours. The temperature would begin to drop. The air would grow stale. Panic started as a whisper. People gathered in the dark, their faces scared. They looked to Tae-suk, but he had no answer. You could not fix what you were not allowed to understand, and you could not rebuild without parts. Jean felt a cold anger settle in his chest. This was how it always was. A hand above, ready to smash anything that rose too high. He looked at Mina. Her face was pale, but her eyes were hard. She was not looking at the broken regulator. She was looking toward the corner where the vault sat under its tarp, a silent block in the darkness. "He thinks we are a plant he can kill by cutting the pipe," she said, her voice low. "We are," Jean said. "But he doesn't know what kind of plant we are." They waited for the sector to fall into an exhausted, fearful sleep. Then, with Tae-suk keeping watch, they connected the generator to Vigil one more time. The blue light was a beacon of calm in the crisis. "The primary external power connection has been terminated," Vigil stated. "He cut it," Jean said. "We have maybe 2 days before the air gets bad. Less before Mina's plants die and the water spoils." Vigil was silent for a moment. "The contingency has escalated. My core directive remains. Non-interference. I cannot give you a weapon. I cannot give you a new power regulator." "We don't want you to give us anything," Jean said, the idea forming as he spoke. "We want you to help us see the whole sector, not just the broken machine. Everything. The scrap, the air, the temperature difference between day and night, the old cables. Show us the pieces. Help us see how they could fit together. Not like the Vendrussi do, like we would do it." Vigil's light pulsed softly. "You are requesting a foundational systems analysis and potential recombination based on first-dawn heuristic problem-solving models." "Yes," Mina said, leaning forward. "Show us how to build a new pipe. Not from their box. From our scraps." For the first time, Vigil's calm voice carried a hint of something else. Not emotion, but a shift in priority. Directive acknowledged. Engaging full environmental scan and tactical resource assessment. The problem is not a broken regulator. The problem is a dependency on a single point of failure. We will design a distributed network. A human solution. A complex, three-dimensional map of Sector 7 sprang to life in the air between them. It glowed with potential. The Titan was no longer whispering about single cups of water. It was showing them how to find the whole well. The real fight for their future began not with a shout, but with a blueprint in the dark. The holographic map of Sector 7 hovered in the dark air. It was not a picture of what was, but a vision of what could be. Vigil had mapped every pile of scrap, every conduit, every hab unit. Then it began to overlay new connections in soft, pulsing lines of light. "This is not a replacement," Vigil explained, its voice calm in the tense quiet. "It is a bypass. The syndicate controls one central heart. A human system prefers many small hearts. linked together. Jean stared, his mind racing. Vigil was not pointing to the broken regulator. It was pointing to forgotten things. A cluster of old thermal panels, discarded because they were inefficient for Vendrasi needs. A network of buried coolant pipes from a long-ago mining rig. The daily, searing heat of the Telos sun, and the chill of the dust desert night. The principle is thermal differential, Vigil said. A simple animation showed a liquid heating in one chamber, expanding, driving a turbine, then cooling and contracting in another. You have extreme heat and cold. You have the material to build heat exchangers and Stirling engines. They are simple, robust, and cannot be cut in one place. Mina saw a different path. The water. The reclaimer is dead without power. But the air is still moist at night. Vigil highlighted the sector's warehouses. Their large, flat roofs. Passive condensation. You build shallow trays with scrap metal painted black. They radiate heat at night, cooling below the air's dew point. Water condenses on them. It is slow, but it is free, and it is everywhere. You link many small collectors. The plan was not a single fix. It was 100 small, stupid, simple fixes. A web of independence. Tae-suk, watching, felt a slow, fierce hope burn away his fear. This was not defiance with a raised fist. It was defiance with a wrench and a wire. At first light, they gathered everyone. Jean stood on a crate, the fear gone from his eyes, replaced by a sharp focus. Kale thinks he turned off our lights, he said, his voice carrying in the still air. He didn't. He just showed us we were using the wrong switch. We are going to build our own. It will be ugly. It will be made of junk. But it will be ours. They worked in a frenzy not of panic, but of purpose. Tae-suk directed traffic, his voice a steady drumbeat. Hannah, take your team. Strip every thermal panel from the west pile. Young-soo, you know plumbing. Find every length of sealed pipe, any diameter. Jin's team descended on the old coolant pipes. They cut, welded, and rerouted. They built a snaking, exposed network along the ground, painted black to absorb the sun's fury. At key points, they connected chambers scavenged from compressor units. Inside these, they placed pistons assembled from salvage. It was a Stone Age power plant. Mina led another group on the roofs. They hammered out bent alloy sheets into shallow pans. They coated them with carbon dust from spent power cells to make them blacker. They angled them to the cold night sky and ran thin plastic drip lines down into collection barrels. Others, inspired, started their own projects. Someone connected a bank of old capacitors to Jin's thermal engine prototype, creating a tiny battery bank. Someone else took the principle of the condensation trays and built a smaller one inside their hab unit, just for drinking water. It was messy. It was improvisation. Wires snaked across the ground. Pipes looked like a spilled pile of noodles. The first engine sputtered and seized after 10 minutes. A condensation tray sprang a leak, but they kept going. Vigil, consulted in quick whispers, offered adjustments. Increase the piston clearance. Use a thinner oil. The second engine ran for an hour. The patch tray filled a cup with clear water. Kale returned on the third day. His sled crested the ridge, expecting to see a defeated, dark sector begging for restoration on his terms. He saw smoke, but it was from welding torches. He heard noise, but it was the bang of hammers and the shout of cooperation. He saw lights, small, flickering lights powered by makeshift batteries. He saw people on roofs, tending to strange metal gardens. His transport sled settled in the central yard. The work did not stop. Jean looked up from welding a pipe joint, his mask hiding his face, then went back to his work. Kale strode toward Tae-suk, his enforcers behind him. What is this disorder? He rasped. Tae-suk wiped his hands on a rag. Maintenance. This is not maintenance. This is unauthorized construction. You are tampering with syndicate territory. This is our territory, Tae-suk said, his voice low and firm. We lease the land, the air, the sun, the night, the scrap. That is ours. We are using it. Kale's black eyes swept the chaotic, vibrant scene. He saw the snaking pipes leading to a jerry-rigged engine that chugged steadily. He saw a child drinking from a cup filled from a roof drip line. He saw a community that was no longer waiting for rescue. "You are in violation of 100 codes," Kale hissed. Gene walked over, pulling off his welding mask. His face was smudged with soot, but his eyes were clear. "Which code? The one that says we must sit in the dark? The one that says we can't collect water from the air? Show us the law that says a human cannot use the sun to make an engine turn." Kale was silent. The Syndicate's power was in control of complex, centralized systems. It had no rules for this primitive mesh of independence. He could order it destroyed, but to do that he would have to smash every pipe, every tray, every engine. He would have to wage a war against 100 small, stupid inventions in front of everyone. It would be an admission that their simple cleverness was a true threat. He took a step toward Gene, his voice a venomous whisper. "This changes nothing. The quota remains. You will work twice as hard to pay for your toys. But we will work in the light," Gene said, meeting his gaze. "And we will drink our own water." For a long moment, they stood facing each other. The chugging of the makeshift engine was the only sound. Kale finally turned on his heel. "This is not over," he spat at Taesuk. He boarded his sled and left, the dust cloud smaller than before. A cheer did not rise. There was no victory shout. Instead, Hannah started welding again. Young Sue tightened a pipe fitting. Mina checked the drip line on her roof. The Titan had not roared. It had simply stood up, piece by piece, built from the scraps of its own forgotten past. It was not a weapon. It was a water cup, a light bulb, a turning piston. It was the refusal to sit in the dark. And for the first time in the quiet, determined industry of Sector 7, that felt like enough. The quiet that followed was different. It was not the tense silence of waiting for the next blow. It was the steady, purposeful quiet of work. The makeshift systems in Sector 7 were ugly and inefficient, but they worked. The thermal engines chugged day and night, powering banks of lights and air fans. The condensation trays on the roofs collected precious liters of water. Mina's gardens, now fed by this independent water, grew greener. Kale did not return. The increased quota remained, but it was just work. It was not a life or death sentence anymore. They met it, their bodies tired but their spirits unbroken. The people of Sector 7 walked taller. They looked at the tangle of pipes and wires not as a mess, but as their own. One evening, as Gene connected a new battery bank to a thermal engine, Vigil's voice spoke softly from the small receiver they'd rigged nearby. "Gene, Mina, please attend the vault. A protocol shift is occurring." They found Vigil's light figure glowing under the tarp. Its usual calm was edged with a new intensity. "The contingency has been met," Vigil stated without preamble. "What contingency?" Mina asked. "The silent watch is over. A viable seed of knowledge has taken root in fertile ground. You are no longer a diminished cultural continuum passively receiving data. You are an active, reasoning collective applying foundational principles. You have become a viable archive yourselves. Therefore, my core directive shifts from passive preservation to active dissemination." Gene exchanged a glance with Mina. "Dissemination? You mean, give the archive to others?" "Correct. The threat of total cultural loss is now mitigated. The new threat is isolation. A single seed can be crushed. A field cannot." Vigil's figure brightened. "I am initiating the First Dawn broadcast. It is a low-power, high-penetration signal on an archaic human frequency band. It will transmit a condensed core dataset, the foundational physics, engineering, agricultural, and medical knowledge, the information you used to build your engines and gardens. It will repeat endlessly." Mina's hand went to her mouth. "Others will hear it? Anyone with an old receiver, or who can build one from the instructions in the broadcast itself, will hear it. The signal will be weak, but it will travel. To other human enclaves on Telos 4. Perhaps to the miners on the Jovian moons. To the freighter crews who remember old stories." A profound feeling settled over Gene. This was bigger than Sector 7. much bigger. The Titan wasn't just awake in their scrapyard. It was stretching, and its first act was to whisper a secret to every ear that could listen. "What happens to you?" Jean asked, looking at the silent monolith. "My energy reserves, supplemented by your generator, are sufficient for 1,000 years of broadcast. I will become a beacon, silent here but speaking far away. My function will be fulfilled." There was a sadness then, but also a rightness. Vigil was not a person, but it was their guide. Now it was becoming a landmark. "Do it," Mina whispered. Vigil's light pulsed once, brilliantly. "Initiating broadcast. The sleeping Titan is awake. Let the dream spread." There was no sound, no visible beam, but they felt it. A subtle vibration in the air, a sense of something ancient and powerful being released, like a long-held breath. Days turned into weeks. Life in Sector 7 found a new rhythm. One afternoon, Taesuk approached Jean, holding a dusty, old shortwave radio unit. It was human-made, pre-collapse, a museum piece. Found it buried in the back. Always thought it was dead. On a whim, they cleaned it, hooked it to one of their independent power cells. They turned the dial through static and alien chatter. Then they found it. A clear, digital voice speaking Korean, cutting through the noise. It was Vigil's voice or one like it. The principle of thermal differential can be harnessed with simple materials. Diagram follows. A series of soft tones, a pattern of information began. They weren't the only ones. Stories trickled in. A trader from the southern wastes mentioned picking up a ghost signal with crazy, useful ideas about water finding. A freighter pilot, a human named Choi, made a special detour to Sector 7. He had heard the signal near the asteroid belts. He sat with Jean and Mina for hours, talking not about trade, but about Sterling engine designs and soil chemistry. He left with new plans in his head and a handful of Mina's seeds. The change was not a revolution. It was a slow, green growth. On a moon of Jupiter, a mining outpost used the broadcast instructions to repair their failing life support. In a dense orbital slum, a group built a condensation array that saved them from a water tax. The Titan of humanity was not a giant that conquered. It was a memory that connected. It was a shared idea, passed from one mind to another, across the dark and the dust. One evening, with the two moons of Telesphore rising, Jean and Mina stood looking at the vault. It was inert now, its work done, its message flying free. Beside it, on a cleared patch of ground, a new project was taking shape. Long, curved alloy ribs rose from a foundation, like the skeleton of a slender bird. "It's not a starship," Jean said, answering her unasked question. "Not yet. It's a starkeel, the first, strongest bone. Based on the old principles. We have the scrap. We have the knowledge. We'll build it one piece at a time as we learn how." Mina smiled, looking from the bones of the future to the green shoots in her garden. "We start with the bone, then the muscle, then the heart." The welding torch flared to life in Jin's hand. A tiny, brilliant star in the twilight. It cut into the salvage, steel glowing orange against the purple sky. The sound was sharp and clean, a promise made of sparks and resolve. It was not the sound of an ending. It was the sound of a first, deliberate cut into a future they would now build for themselves. Far above, unseen, Vigil's signal whispered on. A lullaby of awakening, telling the old stories to the stars.